The badge on his chest made him feel untouchable. The truth standing in front of him would prove otherwise. The first thing anyone noticed was not the flashing patrol lights or the gathering crowd outside the upscale department store in downtown Atlanta. It was the silence of the woman standing in the center of it all. While nervous shoppers whispered to one another and employees pointed toward a shopping bag resting beside her feet, she remained perfectly still, her shoulders relaxed, her expression unreadable, as though she had already seen this moment unfold long before anyone else realized what it would become. Officer Ryan Walker stepped forward with the confidence of a man who believed his uniform answered every question before they were ever asked. His partner stayed a few feet behind, watching as the store manager insisted that expensive jewelry had disappeared only moments after the woman walked away from the display. No receipt had been found. No explanation seemed good enough for the accusations already spreading through the crowd. Phones slowly appeared in people's hands. Someone started recording. Another voice quietly muttered that incidents like this happened every day. Ryan barely glanced at the evidence. His attention stayed fixed on the woman herself. She wore a navy sweater, dark jeans, comfortable walking shoes, and carried herself with remarkable composure. Nothing about her appearance suggested wealth or authority, at least not to him. In his mind, the case was already solved before the first question had even been asked. "Ma'am," he said in a firm voice that echoed across the polished marble entrance. "Place your shopping bag on the ground and keep your hands where I can see them." She calmly complied without argument. Several shoppers exchanged surprised looks. They expected fear, anger, or desperate excuses. Instead, she simply nodded and rested her hands in front of her. "Is there a reason I'm being detained, officer?" she asked evenly. Ryan ignored the question. The store manager repeated the allegation with growing certainty, pointing toward an empty velvet display where a diamond bracelet had supposedly vanished minutes earlier. Security guards stood nearby, uncertain and uncomfortable, yet no one interrupted. The atmosphere grew heavier with every passing second. It was no longer about a missing bracelet. It had become a public judgment. Ryan instructed his partner to secure the scene while he examined the shopping bag. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for answers, convinced they were about to witness another routine arrest. But the woman never looked toward the people filming her. She never pleaded with the officers. She never raised her voice. Instead, her eyes quietly followed Ryan, studying every decision he made with the calm focus of someone evaluating far more than a single misunderstanding. A faint buzz crackled from Ryan's police radio, but he silenced it without listening. Another transmission followed almost immediately. Again, he ignored it. Across the parking lot, a black SUV slowly entered the shopping center, unnoticed by nearly everyone. One elderly security employee stared at the woman for several long seconds before his face subtly changed, as though recognition had finally reached him. He opened his mouth to speak, but quickly stopped after seeing Ryan's expression. Whatever he had realized, he decided it was safer to remain silent. Ryan reached for his handcuffs, convinced he was about to close another ordinary case. The woman glanced briefly toward the approaching SUV before returning her attention to him. There was not a trace of panic in her eyes, only patience. And somehow, that quiet confidence unsettled everyone except the one man wearing the badge. 45 minutes earlier, the afternoon had begun with nothing more complicated than a promise. Ava Brooks had left her downtown apartment shortly after lunch, determined to spend her only day off doing something she had postponed for weeks. Her mother's 65th birthday was only 2 days away, and for the first time in months, she had an afternoon with no meetings, no emergency briefings, and no city council hearings waiting for her. She parked her silver SUV inside the covered garage of the upscale shopping center and smiled as she noticed families walking beneath the warm Georgia sunshine carrying colorful shopping bags and iced coffee. Without her uniform, her service weapon, or the gold stars that usually rested on her shoulders, she blended effortlessly into the crowd. That anonymity had always been something she treasured. After nearly 20 years in law enforcement, including the last 4 as police chief, moments like these reminded her what ordinary life felt like. She entered the department store with a simple shopping list folded neatly inside her purse. Her mother had admired a handcrafted bracelet during a holiday window display months earlier, and Ava quietly hoped it was still available. As she walked through the bright jewelry department, she greeted employees with the same kindness she offered everyone, asking thoughtful questions and thanking each associate who helped her search the display cases. Several employees recognized her face, but hesitated, uncertain whether to interrupt what appeared to be a peaceful afternoon. Ava appreciated that. She never expected special treatment. She believed respect carried far more value when it was earned without titles. While examining several bracelets beneath the glass display, she noticed a young sales associate becoming increasingly anxious. Another employee whispered something into a manager's ear before disappearing into a back office. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Conversations became quieter. Eyes lingered a little longer than before. Ava had spent enough years reading people to recognize when tension entered a room, but she chose not to react. She simply thanked the associate for the information and continued browsing nearby gift displays, hoping the confusion would resolve itself. A few minutes later, she selected a silk scarf she knew her mother would love and carried it toward another section of the store while considering whether to visit one final jewelry counter before leaving. Unknown to her, a customer had already reported an expensive diamond bracelet missing. The report traveled quickly from one employee to another, growing more dramatic with each retelling. Security personnel began reviewing recent activity, but before any footage could be examined, assumptions quietly started replacing facts. One manager pointed toward the last customer seen near the display. Another agreed without certainty. A hurried phone call reached mall security, followed almost immediately by a request for police assistance. Outside, Officer Ryan Walker acknowledged the dispatch while finishing another routine patrol only a few blocks away. The information he received was brief, incomplete, and filled with uncertainty, yet his confidence never wavered. By the time his patrol vehicle entered the shopping center parking lot, he believed he already knew exactly what kind of situation awaited him. Inside the store, Ava approached the front entrance carrying only her purchased scarf and an empty shopping bag provided by another department. She paused for a moment as automatic doors slid open, enjoying the warm breeze drifting inside. She never realized that within seconds, an ordinary afternoon would become a public misunderstanding that would test not only one officer's judgment, but the integrity of everyone watching. Ryan Walker stepped through the entrance with the deliberate confidence of someone who had spent years believing hesitation was a weakness. His polished boots echoed against the marble floor as shoppers instinctively moved aside, creating a narrow path between the display counters. His partner, Officer Daniel Foster, remained a step behind, quietly observing the uneasy expressions on the faces of employees gathered near the jewelry department. Before Ryan asked a single question, the store manager hurried toward him with an anxious expression and immediately pointed across the showroom. "That is the woman," he said, lowering his voice, but not enough to prevent nearby customers from hearing. "She was the last person standing near the bracelet display before we realized it was missing." Ryan followed the manager's finger until his eyes settled once again on Ava Brooks. She stood near the front entrance holding only a neatly folded shopping bag containing the silk scarf she had already purchased. She was not rushing toward the exit. She was not looking around nervously. She simply waited, her posture calm and composed as if she believed the truth would eventually catch up with the confusion unfolding around her. To Ryan, however, her calmness appeared suspicious rather than reassuring. Years of making quick judgments had convinced him that confidence often meant someone was hiding something. Instead of asking employees whether security cameras had already been reviewed or whether anyone had actually witnessed a theft, he accepted the assumptions surrounding the situation as though they were established facts. "Ma'am," he called out firmly while closing the remaining distance between them, "I need you to remain exactly where you are." Ava slowly turned toward him and met his gaze without the slightest hint of hostility. "Of course, officer," she answered politely. "May I ask what this is about?" Ryan stopped only a few feet away. "We have reason to believe merchandise may have been taken from this store. Until we finish our investigation, you are not free to leave." Several shoppers paused in the entranceway, pretending to browse nearby displays while quietly listening. More phones appeared above shoulders as people sensed an unusual confrontation developing. Ava noticed them immediately, but her attention returned to Ryan. "I understand your responsibility," she replied evenly. I would simply ask that you verify the facts before reaching any conclusions. Her measured response seemed only to deepen Ryan's certainty. He interpreted patience as calculation and dignity as defiance hidden beneath careful words. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside him. Perhaps security has already located camera footage, he suggested quietly. Ryan barely acknowledged the comment. We will get to that, he replied without taking his eyes off Ava. First, I need to know exactly what is inside your shopping bag. Ava gently placed the bag on the polished floor without protest. Only a scarf that I purchased a few minutes ago, she answered. The receipt should still be inside. Ryan examined the bag, but seemed more interested in confirming his own expectations than discovering the truth. Nearby, the elderly security employee continued watching Ava with growing concern. Recognition had become certainty now. He knew exactly who she was, yet uncertainty held him in place. Interrupting a police investigation carried risks, especially when one officer appeared completely convinced he was right. At that exact moment, another message sounded through Ryan's police radio. The dispatcher's voice was urgent enough that Daniel instinctively reached toward his own radio to listen, but Ryan silenced the transmission once again before the full message could be heard. Outside the glass entrance, the black sport utility vehicle rolled to a quiet stop near the curb. Two sharply dressed command staff members stepped out and looked toward the department store with expressions that immediately suggested they had arrived for something far more significant than a missing bracelet. The growing circle of spectators became strangely quiet as the tension settled over the front entrance like a heavy storm cloud. Some people whispered that the situation seemed obvious. Others looked uncertain, exchanging uneasy glances as they watched a woman who showed no signs of panic despite standing at the center of public suspicion. Ava Brooks remained exactly where Ryan had instructed her to stand, her hands visible, her voice calm, and her attention focused entirely on the officer questioning her. She understood that every word spoken during moments like these could shape what happened next. Ryan took another slow step forward. I am giving you another opportunity to explain why store employees believe merchandise disappeared immediately after you visited the jewelry counter. Ava answered without hesitation. I visited several displays. I purchased a scarf. I never removed any jewelry from the cases, and I believe the security cameras will confirm that. Ryan folded his arms. Everyone says they are innocent. His words carried enough volume for the nearby crowd to hear, prompting several people to quietly nod as though the statement alone settled the matter. Daniel Foster looked toward the security office visible across the sales floor. The cameras should answer this in a few minutes, he suggested. Maybe we should wait before making any decisions. Ryan dismissed the idea almost immediately. Evidence disappears when people are given time, he replied. We handle the situation first. Ava studied him for a brief moment before speaking again. Officer, I fully intend to cooperate. I am simply asking that the investigation begin with facts rather than assumptions. Her respectful tone somehow irritated Ryan even more. He had expected nervous excuses or emotional protests. Instead, every answer she gave sounded measured, patient, and confident. To him, it felt less like cooperation and more like someone quietly questioning his authority. Around them, more shoppers stopped walking. Several parents gently moved their children closer, while others continued recording with their phones. The atmosphere no longer resembled an ordinary misunderstanding inside a department store. It had become a public spectacle fueled by speculation rather than evidence. Near the entrance, the elderly security employee finally stepped forward a few cautious steps before stopping again. He recognized Ava beyond any doubt now. He had seen her speak at community safety events more than once. Yet he hesitated, uncertain whether interrupting an active police investigation would only make matters worse. Before he could decide, Ryan addressed Ava once more. Until this investigation is complete, I am placing you in temporary detention. His partner immediately glanced toward him with visible concern. Ryan, Daniel said quietly, we still have not reviewed the surveillance footage. Ryan answered without looking away from Ava. We have enough to move forward. Ava slowly nodded. If that is your decision, I will comply. But I sincerely hope every step taken today receives the same careful review that every citizen deserves. Those words lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Even a few bystanders lowered their phones for a moment. sensing there was something unusual about the woman standing before them. At that exact instant, another urgent transmission sounded through both officers' radios. This time Daniel listened. His expression changed almost immediately as he heard dispatch repeating that command staff had arrived at the location requesting immediate contact with the responding officers. Ryan, convinced he remained fully in control of the situation, paid almost no attention to the message. Outside the entrance, the two command officers had already crossed the parking lot with steady, purposeful steps, their eyes fixed on the woman waiting quietly inside the store rather than on the officers surrounding her. Daniel lowered his radio slowly, his eyes fixed on Ryan with an expression that silently urged caution. "Command is asking for an immediate status update," he said in a measured voice. Ryan barely acknowledged him. "They can wait 2 more minutes," he replied while keeping his attention on Ava. "We are finishing this first." Ava remained composed, her breathing steady despite dozens of curious eyes following every movement she made. She knew how quickly assumptions could become accepted as facts when enough people repeated the same story. That lesson had shaped much of her career, and standing inside the department store, she refused to let frustration replace patience. "Officer," she said calmly, "I respectfully request that the surveillance footage be reviewed before any further conclusions are reached. That is the simplest way to determine exactly what happened." Ryan answered with a faint, skeptical smile. "The cameras will tell their story eventually. Right now I am asking the questions." The elderly security employee could remain silent no longer. He stepped forward cautiously, removing his identification badge from around his neck as though searching for the courage to speak. "Officer," he began, "there might be something you should know about." Ryan raised a hand before the man could finish. "Sir, please step back. We are conducting an investigation." The security employee hesitated, glanced toward Ava, then reluctantly obeyed. His concern only deepened. Nearby, another store employee hurried out of the security office carrying a tablet computer. "We are almost ready to review the footage," she announced to the manager. "The system is loading the recordings from the jewelry section now." The manager nodded nervously but said nothing to Ryan, who appeared completely focused on maintaining control of the scene, rather than waiting for additional information. Around the entrance, the atmosphere subtly shifted. Some shoppers who had initially assumed Ava was guilty now exchanged uncertain looks. They noticed her calm responses, her respectful tone, and the complete absence of panic. One woman quietly whispered to her husband, "If she really did something wrong, she is handling this very differently than I expected." Another customer lowered his phone, no longer certain he was witnessing what he had first believed. Outside, the black sport utility vehicle remained parked near the curb. 2 senior command officers entered the building with steady, purposeful strides, speaking briefly into their radios before scanning the crowded entrance. One of them paused the moment he saw Ava standing peacefully in the center of the gathering. His expression changed instantly from routine professionalism to unmistakable surprise. Without saying a word, he increased his pace. Daniel noticed the approaching officials before Ryan did. "Ryan," he said quietly, "I think we should pause for a second." Ryan frowned. "There is nothing to pause." At that same moment, the employee inside the security office finally opened the surveillance recording. She stared at the screen for several seconds, then looked back toward the front entrance with widening eyes. Whatever she had just seen clearly did not match the accusation that had brought the officers there. Before she could speak, the first command officer reached the edge of the crowd. Several people instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path through the spectators. The conversations around the entrance faded into complete silence as he walked directly past Ryan without hesitation. His attention never drifted toward the missing bracelet, the store manager, or the growing audience. Instead, his eyes remained fixed entirely on Ava Brooks, and the respectful expression on his face suggested that within the next few moments, everything everyone believed about the afternoon was about to change. The senior command officer stopped only a few feet from Ava before offering a respectful nod that immediately caught the attention of everyone. Standing nearby, he did not speak loudly, yet the quiet confidence in his voice carried farther than any raised command. "Good afternoon, Chief Brooks," he said. "I apologize for the delay. We came as soon as dispatch notified us." For a brief moment, the entire entrance seemed frozen. The whispers disappeared. The phones remained raised, but no one spoke. Ryan stared at the officer, convinced he had misunderstood what he had just heard. "Chief," he repeated slowly. The command officer turned toward him with visible confusion. "Yes," he answered. "Police Chief Ava Brooks." Daniel Foster felt the color leave his face as he looked from Ava to the command officer and back again. Suddenly, every unanswered radio transmission made perfect sense. Every request from dispatch had been trying to reach the responding officers before the misunderstanding went any further. Ryan remained silent, struggling to reconcile the calm woman standing before him with the image he had built in his mind only minutes earlier. Ava finally spoke, her tone as steady as it had been since the first accusation. "Officer Walker, I chose not to identify myself because I believe the investigation should follow the same standards that apply to every member of our community. Titles should never determine whether someone receives fairness." Her words landed with remarkable weight. Several shoppers slowly lowered their phones. The elderly security employee closed his eyes for a moment, relieved that the truth had finally surfaced. At nearly the same time, the employee inside the security office hurried toward the entrance carrying the tablet computer. "We reviewed the footage," she said, breathing quickly after crossing the sales floor. "The recording is very clear." She handed the tablet to the store manager, whose expression changed almost immediately after watching only a few seconds. The missing bracelet had never been placed inside Ava's shopping bag. In fact, the recording showed another customer accidentally carrying the bracelet to a nearby service counter while asking an employee whether it had been set aside for cleaning. The bracelet had remained inside the store the entire time. No theft had occurred. No attempt to conceal merchandise had taken place. The entire incident had grown from confusion, rushed assumptions, and incomplete communication. The manager's shoulders sank as the realization settled over him. "Chief Brooks," he said quietly, "I owe you a sincere apology. We should have confirmed the facts before making that report." Ava accepted his words with a small nod. "Thank you," she replied. Acknowledging a mistake is the first step toward correcting it. The command officer then looked directly at Ryan. "Officer Walker, I need you and Officer Foster to provide a complete account of every decision made from the moment you arrived." Ryan opened his mouth, but found no immediate response. For the first time that afternoon, certainty had disappeared from his expression. Around them, the crowd no longer watched with curiosity. They watched with reflection. What had seemed like a simple accusation only minutes earlier had become a lesson about patience, evidence, and the danger of allowing assumptions to move faster than the truth. Ava glanced once across the department store, then calmly picked up the shopping bag containing the birthday gift she had come to buy. She had entered the store hoping to celebrate her mother. Instead, she had unintentionally reminded everyone present that the strongest authority in any investigation is never a uniform, a title, or a first impression. It is the willingness to let the facts speak before judgment does. No one moved for several long seconds. The department store that had been filled with whispers only moments earlier now stood in complete silence, as though every person present understood they had just witnessed something far greater than a simple misunderstanding. Ryan Walker lowered his eyes for the first time that afternoon. The confidence that had guided every decision since he entered the building had quietly dissolved, replaced by the unmistakable weight of reflection. Daniel Foster remained beside him, saying nothing as he replayed each moment in his mind. He remembered suggesting they wait for the surveillance footage. He remembered the unanswered radio calls. Most of all, he remembered how calmly Ava Brooks had asked for nothing more than a fair investigation. The senior command officer accepted the tablet from the store manager and reviewed the security footage himself. After watching the recording from beginning to end, he handed it back without a single question. The evidence spoke for itself. Every timeline matched. Every movement had been documented. The missing bracelet had never left the building, and Chief Brooks had never touched it. There was no uncertainty left to debate. The command officer looked toward Ryan with a professional but unmistakably serious expression. "Officer Walker, you will submit a complete incident report before the end of your shift. Professional standards will review today's response according to department policy." Ryan nodded quietly. There was no argument to offer. He understood that accountability was not punishment. It was a responsibility every officer accepted when taking the oath to serve. Ava watched the exchange without satisfaction or anger. She had spent too many years wearing the uniform to celebrate another officer's difficult moment. She understood that mistakes could become lessons only when people were willing to face them honestly. Ryan slowly turned toward her. His voice, once filled with certainty, now carried humility. "Chief Brooks, I owe you an apology. I allowed assumptions to influence my judgment before the evidence was available. That should not have happened." Ava met his eyes for a brief moment before answering. "Thank you for saying that, officer. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity while the facts are being established. That standard protects the public, and it also protects good officers." Several shoppers quietly nodded after hearing her response. They had expected anger. Some had expected public humiliation. Instead, they witnessed professionalism meeting accountability. The elderly security employee finally smiled with visible relief. Even the store manager appeared grateful that the situation was ending with honesty rather than hostility. Outside, the afternoon traffic continued flowing through downtown Atlanta as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Inside the store, however, something had changed. Employees who had rushed to conclusions now understood the value of patience. Customers who had immediately believed the first accusation realized how easily appearances could mislead. Daniel glanced once more at the surveillance office and quietly promised himself that he would never again allow urgency to replace careful investigation. Ava picked up the shopping bag containing her mother's birthday gift and prepared to leave. Before reaching the entrance, she paused and looked back at the officers. "Every interaction becomes part of the public's trust," she said calmly. "People may forget our names, but they always remember how we made them feel when they were at their most vulnerable." Those words remained in the air long after she turned toward the exit. No lecture could have carried greater weight. No formal policy manual could have delivered the lesson more clearly. On an ordinary afternoon that began with suspicion and misunderstanding, the most powerful reminder of justice had come not from authority alone, but from patience, humility, and the simple decision to let the truth arrive before the judgment did. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the excitement that had filled the department store gave way to thoughtful conversations. People who had arrived expecting to witness a routine police response now left carrying a very different memory. Some quietly deleted the videos they had recorded, realizing they had captured only a small piece of a much larger story. Others remained near the entrance, speaking softly about how quickly assumptions could shape public opinion before the facts had a chance to emerge. Inside the store, the atmosphere shifted from tension to accountability. The store manager gathered his employees and thanked the associate who had insisted on reviewing the surveillance footage before making any final conclusions. He admitted that the missing bracelet had never truly been missing at all. A customer had simply handed it to another employee after noticing it had been left unattended near the display. A misunderstanding had traveled through the store faster than the truth, and every person involved had learned how easily incomplete information could become accepted as certainty. The senior command officer remained for several more minutes, speaking privately with Ryan Walker and Daniel Foster. Although no details of the conversation could be heard, Ryan's posture reflected someone carefully listening rather than defending himself. He understood that every decision made during an investigation carried consequences far beyond a single report. Public trust was built one interaction at a time, and once damaged, it required patience and integrity to rebuild. Daniel accepted responsibility for not pressing harder when he believed additional evidence should have been reviewed first. The discussion ended not with raised voices, but with quiet reminders about professionalism, procedural fairness, and the responsibility every officer shared regardless of rank. Ava Brooks waited near the customer service desk while the store manager completed the paperwork documenting the incident. Before leaving, he presented her with the bracelet she had originally come to purchase for her mother's birthday. "Please allow us to offer a discount," he said sincerely. Ava smiled politely and shook her head. "I appreciate the gesture, but I would rather pay the full price." Accountability is not something that can be purchased. It is something we practice. The manager nodded with genuine respect. He understood that her response reflected the same principles she had demonstrated throughout the entire afternoon. As Ava completed her purchase, several customers quietly approached to thank her for remaining calm during such a difficult experience. She accepted every kind word with humility, reminding each person that patience and respect belong to everyone, especially during moments of uncertainty. Before walking toward the exit, she noticed the elderly security employee who had recognized her earlier. He apologized for not speaking sooner. Ava placed a reassuring hand over her shopping bag and offered him a gentle smile. "You do not need to apologize," she said. "The important thing is that the truth was given the opportunity to be heard." Those simple words seemed to lift a burden from his shoulders. Outside, the late afternoon sunlight reflected across the windows of the shopping center as families continued their ordinary routines, unaware that inside one department store an unforgettable lesson had quietly unfolded. The missing bracelet had been found. The investigation had been corrected. More importantly, everyone involved had witnessed how easily assumptions could outrun evidence, and how essential it was for justice to remain patient enough to wait for the complete story before reaching a conclusion. The following Monday morning, sunlight poured through the windows of police headquarters as officers gathered for the weekly leadership briefing. The room looked exactly as it always had, yet the atmosphere felt different. There were no public announcements about the incident at the department store, no dramatic speeches, and no attempt to embarrass anyone involved. Instead, the meeting focused on a single principle that every person in the room understood without needing to hear names repeated. Chief Ava Brooks stood at the front of the room with the same quiet confidence she had shown throughout the entire misunderstanding. She thanked the officers who had responded professionally after the facts became clear and reminded everyone that accountability was not a sign of failure. It was evidence that an organization cared enough to improve. She spoke about the importance of slowing down when circumstances seemed obvious, explaining that evidence was never an obstacle to good policing. Evidence was the foundation of it. Around the room, officers listened carefully. Ryan Walker remained seated near the back, taking notes more carefully than he ever had before. The events of the previous week had changed him in ways no formal training course ever could. He understood now that confidence without humility could become dangerous, and that every citizen deserved the same fairness regardless of appearance, background, or circumstance. When the meeting concluded, Ryan approached Chief Brooks before she left the conference room. "Chief," he said quietly, "I cannot change what happened, but I can make certain it changes how I serve from this day forward." Ava offered a respectful nod. "That is all any leader can ask," she replied. "Growth begins the moment we stop defending our mistakes and start learning from them." Weeks later, the department introduced additional training emphasizing procedural fairness, careful communication, and evidence-based decision-making before conclusions were reached. The incident at the department store became an anonymous case study discussed with new recruits, not because someone needed to be blamed, but because future officers deserve the opportunity to learn from a real moment where patience would have changed everything. The store manager also implemented new verification procedures before contacting law enforcement, ensuring that surveillance footage and internal communication would be reviewed whenever possible before assumptions became official reports. Small changes spread outward, creating better habits for everyone involved. Ava eventually delivered the birthday bracelet to her mother, who smiled warmly without ever knowing how unusual the shopping trip had become. Looking at the bracelet resting gently inside its gift box, Ava quietly reflected on the strange way truth often worked. It rarely arrived first. It usually walked behind fear, misunderstanding, and assumption, asking only for enough time to be seen. As she left her mother's home that evening, the sunset painted the Atlanta skyline with shades of gold and deep blue. The city continued moving forward, just as it always had, but somewhere inside that movement lived an important reminder. Authority may open doors, but character determines what happens after they open. A badge can represent responsibility, but it can never replace integrity. And in the end, the strongest form of justice is not found in power over another person. It is found in the courage to let the truth speak before judgment ever does.